Yeah, so welcome everybody to our webinar this morning, this afternoon, depending on which side of the pond you're on, Canada, US, UK, otherwise. Peter Carson here and Charles with me from Essential. So we're going to be talking about Teams and Microsoft 365. Title of the webinar is Sharing is Caring. So it's all about how you leverage Microsoft 365 and Teams for sharing, both in the box, and we're actually going to talk about our own Extranet User Manager product towards the end and things that you can do from that side as well. So Charles, why don't you introduce yourself, tell us a bit about Essential to begin with.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Peter. Pleasure to meet everybody. For those that don't know, my name is Charles. I work for an organization called Essential Computing. We're based just outside of Bristol, actually, in a little town called Portishead. We've got a lovely little marina there that the office overlooks. But we've been around for over 30 years now. I think we were one of the first UK Microsoft partners. And during that time, we've sort of geared our whole sort of ethos and business around plugging the gaps that native Microsoft doesn't necessarily fill. So we've gone from things like migrating email archives and implementing email archives to now in the 365 and cloud boom, helping organizations govern and protect their data, help reduce some 365 costs as well with stuff like SharePoint archiving and all the premium storage that goes along with that. We also do other things that are slightly different to all of that, and we call that the more technical side of things. We do things like 365 incorporated workplace management systems. We've got a Microsoft integrated learning management system, which we will touch on later on in the webinar, because that's a very key topic. And then obviously with partnering with the guys at EUM, we do a lot around secure sharing, external users, guest access, registrations, and so on. So been around for a long time, and really enjoy the sort of space that that we're in. Just cool. while I've got you, I thought it might be a good idea, Peter, just to explain about the Teams webinar, because I know it's slightly different. Is this a Teams call, or are we doing a Teams webinar for
it's actually a Teams call that we're using for this one.
Okay, perfect. In which case, housekeeping is raise your hand if you want to ask a question, or please feel free to put it in your put it in the chat window, and we will we'll pick it up.
Absolutely. Yeah, I always appreciate when people have thoughts, comments, questions. It's fun to answer those live as we go through. So Logan and I, our VP of Sales on the Extranet User Manager side, we're actually in Portishead at your office just last month. That was fun catching up with you and Ross and the whole team over there.
You brought the weather with you as well, because Logan had never been to the UK before, and it was roasting hot while he was over. So that was great.
Very atypical, yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. So myself, I'm Peter Carson. I'm the president founder of both Envision IT and Extranet User Manager. Two brands, one company. Envision IT is actually similar to Essential. We deliver a lot of Microsoft 365 project work in sort of the GTA Canada space generally, and then Extranet User Manager is our SaaS product for really making Microsoft simple from a sharing point of view. And we're going to dive more into that from that point of view. Just got awarded another annual M365 MVP, so proud of that. Run a local Toronto Microsoft 365 group there as well. So in terms of key takeaways, why are folks here? What you should be looking to take away from this webinar? And it's really about the sometimes battle between business and IT, where business just wants to get business done, and IT wants things done in a certain safe and secure and compliant manner, and they don't always meet at the middle. And sometimes shadow IT comes out of that and other things. So our goal really here is to make sure that business can get business done, but really leveraging Microsoft 365 to do that business, and that IT and compliance can be happy and can sleep at night from a security and a compliance perspective. Well, part of making it work.
Interesting you mentioned that. I was just going to jump in with an anecdote around secure sharing and people having the best interests at heart, but not necessarily having the securest principles in place. Because we were catching up with an old Essential employee a couple of weeks ago, and he was invited to a Dropbox environment, which by design was built to aid the project. It was a long ongoing project. There was lots of secure information in there, and it was built as a centralized area for people to go in. And he tested it years after leaving the company, and he still had access to said secure and highly confidential documentation. So whilst it was the best interest of the project at heart, the security side was a little bit lapsed there. So it'd be interesting to see how we can combat that.
Absolutely. I mean, having governance around that to say, hey, do we still need this? Do these people still need access to it? That's some of the controls that, business may not be too concerned about. Although these days, cybersecurity should be top of mind for everybody. It sometimes doesn't get the thought that it needs to. But also, you don't want it so difficult that people can't actually use it. So how do we streamline it and make sure that the productivity and the simplicity and the ease of use is there for everybody from that point of view? Because security and simple don't need to be, competing interests. Actually, something that's designed well from a user experience point of view and is secure is actually even more secure because people will actually use it, and that has a lot of benefit from that point of view. So that's a lot of our focus as an organization is that user journey and user experience, and how do we keep that simple and streamlined. And then, of course, controlling your data and branding, like, okay, it's great that you're doing this stuff in Microsoft, but maybe you don't want to be, putting everything out under Microsoft. You want to have your brand, you want your URL, you want your logo and colors and such on there. How can you do that from within Microsoft 365 and still have the best of both worlds from that point of view? So that's what this whole session is all about. So for those of you that don't know Extranet User Manager from a product point of view, been around since 2008, so been in the industry for a long time. It's part of Envision IT, so it is a single corporate entity from that point of view, and we've been very focused on Microsoft 365 right back to the early days in there. And the product's evolved a lot. We've gone through some major releases. We had one about 3 years ago where we really brought the product focus exclusively into the Microsoft 365 space, which I'm really happy with. That's worked really well. And then we just had a new major release last month where we brought Azure AI Search and some really cool functionality and kind of re-architected the product again on that side, all with the goal to how do we make Microsoft simple, which we know is a lofty goal we'll never completely achieve because Microsoft is way too complex a beast. It's just not doable. But when we think about how organizations connect with their external stakeholders, how do we make that portion of the experience simple? And to their credit, I mean, Microsoft's actually been spending a lot of time on their own sharing, and we're going to go over that in this session here to make that simple too. But then when we get at scale and bigger sharing scenarios, that's where we come in from that perspective. So from an agenda point of view, sorry, go ahead, Charles.
Sorry, I was going to say, it was interesting at Comsverse, sorry to keep interrupting, it was interesting at Comsverse when we stood on the booth and our main banner was, "We make Microsoft simple," and the faces that people were making as they walked past, and they looked at it and they were like, really? Okay, let's speak to you guys and see what they mean.
Either there's complete disbelief or there's curiosity. It could go either way.
Yeah.
So I mean, the unstructured sharing, Microsoft's done a nice job from a one of, and we're actually going to use the scenario. Charles and Sarah, who's on the call from Essential, we were all working on this deck together, and how did we do that sharing? I actually screwed it up, so I'm going to go through that example from that point of view. Team shared channels that we use a lot. We actually have a shared channel between Extranet User Manager and Essential. That's a very active one. Get into some of the licensing and products on the Microsoft side, the Enter ID, Purview, SharePoint Premium. It's a little overwhelming right now. I mean, Microsoft has been throwing all these additional product licenses out there, and it's getting a little crazy to kind of keep track of it, but we'll touch on that. And then we'll get into sort of bigger use cases and how EUM itself can help from that point of view, from a portals perspective. So let's start with the hidden costs of insecure sharing. I mean, Charles, if we think about your anecdote with the Dropbox account, I mean, that Dropbox probably wasn't controlled by IT. It was probably set up by the business on somebody's credit card who's probably still paying for it, and maybe they're not even using that Dropbox anymore. Like your ex-colleague still has access to it, but what about everybody else from the original organization? Are they still using it, or is it just kind of sitting out there ringing up charges every month on somebody's P card? I don't know. And obviously data loss is a big concern there, that hey, the wrong people still have access to that, and that's an issue. I mean, cyber attacks, you hear about in the news all the time. Certainly in Canada, there's no end of which organization just got hacked, whether it's government or private sector. I assume the same is in the UK, Charles.
Yeah, much the same.
And then, I mean, you've probably made a significant investment in Microsoft and Microsoft 365 in particular. You may not even be using a lot of the features that we're going to be talking about. So if you've paid for it, but you're not leveraging it, how do you actually utilize that? And how do you make your process more efficient from that perspective? So, I mean, Charles, you mentioned Dropbox. These are just a very small sample of what we often see. A vendor might use Google Drive. We actually use DocuSign. I'm actually starting to think about the SharePoint Premium features. Part of it is the ability to electronically sign documents and do things from that point of view. So that's interesting where Microsoft's going there. But Box or ShareFile or WeTransfer, I mean, is there others that you tend to come across, Charles?
These are pretty much the ones we see. I know DocuSign and Adobe, and when we're talking about things like the learning management system and so on, often organizations will want some integration with some form of document signing, but
Yes.
These are the typical ones that we come across. But yeah.
I mean, Microsoft's interesting in their strategy because they're allowing for electronic signature as part of SharePoint Premium, but they also integrate with both DocuSign and Adobe for their electronic signature too. So they kind of recognize that, hey, people don't want to do everything necessarily in Microsoft. There are other vendors out there, and how do we make this all work together, which is good to see.
Yeah, it's different to just disregarding the the marketplace and
the rest of the ecosystem.
Yeah, one way only. Yeah.
Which is kind of the old Microsoft. I mean, Satya's been in place for, I guess, 10 years now. I mean, he's really changed the mindset of Microsoft. I really love where they've gone from that point of view. But I mean, yet we saw all those vendors there. I mean, why pick Microsoft 365? Well, odds are it's the place where your staff are already working, and they're, if you make it simple, if you put the guardrails in place so it is secure, they're more likely to use those platforms that they already understand and trust. And there is a really rich cybersecurity suite underneath. I mean, it's a little overwhelming sometimes to get it all configured, but that's more of an IT thing. I mean, and once IT's done that and put those guardrails in place, then it should be simpler for the business to use them. Of course, they've got every possible cybersecurity and compliance certification known to man around the world. So, even things like in Canada, we have what's called Protected B, which is sort of high security government documents. Those are allowed to go into the Microsoft 365 cloud now. So it's nice to see from that perspective. So I thought we'd start with this here, and this is a spot that Microsoft spent a lot of attention on, is just this ability to send links to documents, which is a very common scenario. So let's take this PowerPoint itself. So I mean, Irina and Amanda from our team sort of started the PowerPoint, and then we wanted to go back and forth and get your input, Charles and Sarah, from a marketing point of view at Essential. So how do we share that back and forth? And there's a number of options for sharing. What I thought I'd do is actually going to get out of the presentation mode here for a second. I'm actually going to pull PowerPoint as a content author into the screen here. And what I did was I just came right into the file menu in PowerPoint and right to the share dialog. So they've embedded this through the suite, whether I'm in SharePoint or Teams or my local Windows Explorer on my local system, Word, Excel, PowerPoint. I mean, they all have share. And it used to be different experiences in different places, but to their credit, I mean, they've standardized this interface and pulled it together. And they keep tweaking and changing it, actually making it simpler. I like where they're going from that point of view. And when you do the default share, I mean, you can have a default share link that gets set. We've set ours to say, hey, just create a link. Assume that whoever you're sending it to already has access, and we're not going to change any permissions, because we find that sort of the safest one to start with. But I can come in here, and instead of people with existing access, I could say, well, let's pick some specific people. Like I could put your email, Charles, and Sarah's in here. Or I could say, hey, I only want staff at Envision IT. They may not have access to the place where this document is, but I want everybody in the company to be able to access this one document. We don't actually use that one that often. This one up here, the anyone, tends to freak a lot of people out. They think it's insecure, but it's actually a good scenario. And it's the one that I chose for this presentation here. Because when you think about the presentation, I mean, it's not super sensitive content. We're going to publish it up on our event page after the event along with the recording. So, there's no personal health information or financial information or anything like that in here. And what I like about this is you still need the link. So it's not like it's anonymously searchable and findable from that point of view. But I hit the anyone link, and then I copied the link and I pasted it in the chat to you and Charles and Sarah, so you get in. What I forgot to do was we defaulted to can view. So Sarah's like, I can get into the presentation, but I can't change it. What's wrong? It's because I'm an idiot and I forgot to select the can edit here. I mean, there is other options here. There's a nice one that can't download. Like if it is something that you want to securely share and you want to control, you can say, hey, people can see it, but they can't download it. They can't send it across to somebody else without sharing the link itself. And those links can expire. They can have a password on them, although I'm not keen on the password option, because how do you give people that password? Kind of breaks the security model from that point of view. So that works well.
Peter, this can all be governed, can it, to make sure that staff within an organization can share it appropriately? Because I'm assuming there might be organizations that have different views on sharing stuff.
Yes, absolutely, and who
you
can share and what can they share can all be managed from that point of view. Actually, Charles, I can see that you're actually in the presentation right now, so it's kind of cool that, hey, like Charles could literally be editing the slides as I'm presenting it. Might mess me up a little bit, but it's all allowed from that point of view. Actually, why don't I jump ahead one slide here? Let me bring it back into presentation mode, because that's a good segue into that topic. So yeah, there are a lot of controls. You can say, hey, who can share? Can everybody in the organization? Can nobody? I'm not a fan of the nobody, because they'll go back to Dropbox and we'll be back in the situation that Charles was talking about. Or you can have specific people. I mean, some of our clients have done a nice job here where they say, hey, you need to belong to this group to be able to externally share. And to get into the group, you have to take some cybersecurity training around how to share appropriately and what to share appropriately. And once you've passed that training, then we'll put you in the group and now you can share. So you can absolutely have some controls around that. You can decide, are they allowed to do that, anyone share, or is there other options that they can choose from there? And it doesn't have to be an all or nothing. You can say, hey, this site can be shared this way, this site can't be shared at all. And you can even pull it into, things like sensitivity. We're going to talk about Microsoft Purview, where you can label the sensitivity of content and say, hey, this is high sensitivity, it shouldn't be shared externally, so that can factor into it as well. So that's what I meant before. I mean, there's a ton of controls in place that you can define how the sharing works, who gets to do it, and what they can do from that point of view. Unfortunately, it is a little complex. I mean, there's a whole bunch of places you need to go to set that all up. But done properly by IT, and we can help organizations through this process, then the business doesn't need to care about that. They just say, hey, as long as I'm in the right place and it's the right type of content, I can do what I need to do, and everything rolls along nicely from there. But there's also the other side of it. I mean, how do those people that you share with access the content? I mean, one of the things around that anyone link, if it's low sensitivity content, is you don't need to worry about access. People just click that link. Like Charles, you clicked it to go into the PowerPoint. It didn't need you to do any sort of authentication as part of that. It just let you in. Now it knew who you were, and that's why your name lit up in my PowerPoint from that point of view. But you could have been an anonymous user at that point. That's fine. But if you are inviting somebody specifically, if I'd put your email address in, I mean, you're a Microsoft 365 user, you would actually use your essential credentials to come in. And odds are, I mean, I'm assuming you've got a browser profile set up that has your credentials in it, it would just take you right in. You wouldn't have to worry about signing in. Now, we don't see that often, but you can set up federation to Google and Meta to say, hey, I want people to be able to come in with their Gmail account or their Facebook account. Most of our scenarios are B2B. Would you say the same on the essential side?
Yeah, definitely. We always try to avoid the personal emails as much as we can, but there are cases where people use them.
I mean, we've done some additional functionality on the EUM product side to support SMS and make that work better, so that people can use personal SMS to come in, typically for training scenarios, sort of low sensitivity scenarios from that point of view. But if they don't have this federation set up, people aren't coming in as a Microsoft user, it's actually still really easy. You get what's called a one-time passcode. So I go to sign in, Microsoft sends me a code, I copy it from my email, I paste it in the login form, and I'm done. There's no forgotten password, none of that grief around managing those accounts. So it is quite simple from that point of view.
Yeah, one of our largest joint customers use that a lot, don't they? Because they they're surfacing end users that don't necessarily have a business email. They're, you know, their nursery staff and kindergarten staff and so on, and they come in using their personal email addresses and authenticate that way.
Exactly, and you know, there could be tens of thousands of them. You don't want to deal with password
20,000,
resets and management and such. Yeah, it's a nightmare. We're not going to go too deep into this topic here. We've got a whole article and series we're working on Microsoft Purview, which is the sensitivity and information protection side of Microsoft. This actually came from the UK. The UK cybersecurity within the government brought out this concept about 20 years ago of a traffic light protocol and the way to label content to say, hey, is it, you know, green low sensitivity or red high sensitivity, and what should we do in those different scenarios? So, you know, if it's green content, it's not sensitive at all. Let's let guests in, and let's not have them have to go through setting up the authenticator app and multi-factor authentication, because that can be a big barrier to people getting in. And if the content's not that sensitive, there's no need for that. But if we come up to the amber level where there is sensitivity there, well, we probably should enforce multi-factor authentication even for the external users. I know it's a higher barrier to entry, but the sensitivity of the content demands it. Whereas we get up into red, high sensitivity, maybe personal health information, financial information, we want to encrypt that content, and maybe we don't even allow that to be shared externally. Depends on the scenario. So just things to think about from that point of view. So, I mean, that sharing that I was showing you allows you to share through OneDrive, through SharePoint, through Teams, through lots of different spots. One feature I want to talk about for a minute here is the request files. So, you know, the scenario here, let's actually dive a little deeper into that, is that you want to get documents from lots of people that are not part of the same organization. The scenario I tend to use is, you know, I'm involved in speaking at a lot of conferences. I've run conferences in the past, and getting decks from speakers so you can make them available to the attendees of the conferences is always a challenge. And doing it through email and attachments is a nightmare. It doesn't work well. So I love this request files feature. You can basically create a link in your OneDrive or in your SharePoint, give that link to anybody, and they can actually use that to upload files through, and it comes to you, but it's private to you. You know, even the person that submitted the file doesn't get to see what they submitted. It's kind of a black box that they're dropping things into, and then you get notified and you can see the content from there. So from a security point of view, I mean, you kind of have to trust the content because people aren't signing in. You can't verify who actually submitted what content. So I wouldn't use it for anything secure, but things, again, like a presentation that's a low security, totally fine to do from that point of view. Now, when we get into Teams, it gets a little confusing. There's kind of two ways to bring people into Microsoft Teams. You can use what's called guests, which is kind of how all the rest of the sharing works in Microsoft 365. The problem here is, you know, if we invited you, Charles, in as a guest into one of our teams, you'd have to switch from Essential in your Teams tenant to Envision IT to see our messages. And I won't take it personally. You probably never look at that because I belong to a bunch of teams that way, and it doesn't show in my activity feed, so I never go see it. And I don't see what's going on. Like there's a whole private NDA team with Microsoft for MVPs where all the private discussions with engineering and MVPs happen. I miss so much stuff there because unless I switch to the Microsoft tenant, I don't see what's going on from that point of view. Whereas Direct Connect,
we've done that in the past actually for some of our migration projects that have run over, you know, 5-6 months, maybe longer, where we wanted to have a space to communicate and connect and, you know, share files and so on. But you're exactly right. We missed a lot of notifications, and then it would resort back to, you know, an email being sent to one another to say,
hey, did you see what I sent you in Teams?
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of defeats the purpose.
Switching profiles all the time wasn't a great use
like
case,
if I come up here in my
work.
Teams, you know, I see all these different tenants that I belong to. That Microsoft one is the important one for me, but other ones, there may be things going on there as well, and I miss it all. I don't see it. Whereas what we did with you guys is we've set you up as what's called a shared channel. That's got the little icon here to say, hey, within our partners, we have an essential computing channel. And actually see, you know, Sarah was chatting at 9:40 this morning about the webinar recording, and I saw that right away because it shows up in my activity feed. It shows up in yours, Charles. Everybody sees what's going on. Actually, we can see Charles panicking at 2 minutes to the top of the hour, saying, "Hey, where's the link to the session I'm supposed to join?"
It wasn't there. Yeah. You
we
managed to
got you
dial me
in,
in
so
okay though.
it all worked out fine. Yeah. But I mean, there's lots of activity going on in our shared channel here, and that works brilliantly. We can see the back and forth on the deck itself, and here's me apologizing for messing up because Sarah only had read access. Again, within minutes we're back and forth because everybody's getting those notifications. So a much better way of working through there. So I won't go too deep into it, but it's using what's called a shared channel in Teams. We've got some articles and such I'll reference at the end through there where it's leveraging what's called direct connect. So it's a different way of bringing somebody into your tenant. It's just for Teams, and it works well from that point of view. So from a recap perspective, it can be internal only, but we see a lot of value from an external shared channels point of view. The challenge is you need to be working with an organization that both of you trust each other, and you're going to set that shared channel up. Like Essential and EUM have a long working history. We trust each other, so we got that channel going. And some organizations are so big, they're just never going to accept you setting up a shared channel with them. The challenge is, as soon as you set up a share channel, you can't do all the share link stuff that I was showing before. I can't create a anyone link or do any of that kind of stuff. It's kind of locked into just the share channel. So if 100% of the people that you want to bring into that conversation and share those documents with are going to be comfortable using the Direct Connect and belong to one of those organizations, that's great. If there's anybody that doesn't, that's a problem. And that's a challenge that Microsoft knows about. And I think it's a little ways out from a roadmap point of view, but they are working on it and thinking about it. Now, I do want to talk about licensing briefly here because there's often still a lot of confusion. There's never been a cost for bringing guests into SharePoint Online, and when Teams came out, it was free to bring guests out. There's a bunch of functionality in 365 that there's zero cost for guests to come in, and even the Enter ID, the identity side of it, there used to be some weird licensing models around it. They simplified it about a year or two ago, and they said, hey, if you've got less than 50,000 monthly active users, which is almost every organization that we work with is below that number. Like you have to have hundreds of thousands of guests, and to get above that 50,000 of them are logging in every month number, then you don't need to worry about any licensing costs from there. It's actually quite minimal. If you're so massive that you're going to go beyond that, it's still not going to cost you a lot of money from that point of view. Now, the thing to be careful, and sometimes people get caught up here, is they say, well, hey, like we're an organization where maybe we're a retail company or we're a construction company where a lot of our staff are not knowledge workers and they're not licensed in Microsoft 365. Technically, there's no blocker for you inviting those people as guests, but from a licensed legal point of view, you're not allowed to do that. Like they actually have to be external to your organization. We've seen people get confused about that. You do have to look at what's called a frontline worker, an F1 or F3 license from Microsoft. Microsoft does want some money if those people are actually on your payroll for you to use it. But if they're external, they're partners, they're vendors, they're clients, what have you, no issue whatsoever from that point of view. So that's sort of some of the top level features from a sort of what can you do out of the box, and the theme there is it tends to be fairly small numbers of people that you're dealing with from a sharing point of view. So where we come into the picture from an extranet user manager point of view is where you want to bring the scale up. And we've got clients with tens or hundreds of thousands of guests, but even as you get into the hundreds, it starts to become unmanageable just from an out of the box point of view. So if you want to build a bespoke portal for your scenario, why would you want to build it on Microsoft 365? And it's kind of back to the original theme, which is you're already working in Microsoft 365. So how do we leverage that, and how do we leverage all that security and compliance richness that's there in 365, and ultimately, how do we eliminate email sharing, which is a really bad way of sharing content, and how do we shut down the shadow IT stuff so we don't get scenarios like years later people still have access to this Dropbox to highly sensitive content type of scenarios. So that's really our goal from that point of view. So, I mean, some of the things that we think about as we're talking with organizations looking to build portals like that is, how are people going to get into the portal? Like, do you know who are all of the people, and are you going to invite them in? And is that manual, or is there some sort of automation? Is it integrated into, Salesforce or an applicant tracking system? There's different scenarios from that point of view. Or do you just want to have public or private registration where people can sign in, and maybe there's some approval process around that, and work through it from that point of view? And then what do you want to do in that portal? Is it just publishing some secure content? Do you actually want to collaborate on documents? Do you want to get right into SharePoint Online, Teams, Yammer, now Viva Engage? I should update that. Or is there actual third-party applications? Do you want to come in from that point of view? In fact, that scenario is where we first started working. Was the partnership, Charles, we both have with now Zensai, previously LMS 365, from a training point of view. Their product is built on Microsoft 365 as well, and often the people that need to be trained are external to the organization. And then ultimately, who's responsible for managing that portal? And the ideal answer to that is not IT. It should be the business. How do we make delegation possible and let the business do that? And there's lots of different types of portals. I mean, Charles, we did our webinar, I think it was back in March, specifically on the data room concept, which we've even taken further there. But we both organizations do a lot of board committee type of scenarios, training portals, client portals, partner portals, what have you from there. In fact, let's take a minute now and talk about one of the joint projects that we first started working together, which was NHS Informatics from your side. So let me pass it over to you, and you take the ball on this one.
Yeah, thanks. So we've sort of alluded back to this Learn 365 system. It's previously called LMS 365. So if I get the naming conventions mixed up, they're the same
I'm
thing.
Still working
they've
on
just
it.
gone through. They've gone through a rebrand, which is quite challenging, similar but different. But what they basically wanted to do was sort of maximize their already very large investment into Microsoft 365. Part of it was building an area that they could skill their users on Microsoft technologies, but they wanted it to be, the core of it to be integrated with this M365 tenant they were already using, because the amount of users they had, they were spending a lot of money on this tenant, and they weren't maximizing this investment. Users weren't necessarily utilizing a lot of the tools, which is probably quite commonplace across the board. I'm sure you'd agree with me on that, Peter. So they basically went down the route of finding Learn 365, which, as Peter's already mentioned, there's a couple of ways that you can sort of access Learn 365 from your own M365 tenant, through SharePoint or through Microsoft Teams, and there is a native app as well. But all of the external users, which in this case was 25,000-ish users, they were external. The vast majority of them were external to the organization. So how can they manage that guest user access? And basically the design was build an EUM registration portal. This registration portal would capture key information about those individuals that were coming in to complete their training within Learn 365. It's hosted on the NHS tenant. The information that was sort of put in by those users would potentially dictate which group of user they would then sit in within the M365 groups of the NHS tenant. And from those groups, they would then be allocated or gain access to the relevant training that is associated to that. So I'm sure people will talk about portals in a bit more detail, but those portals can be completely customized, can't they? And they had a specific sort of idea in mind, a design in mind on what information they wanted to capture. And that information is used then to populate the guest user account to save tons of time on management and so on. Because of the volume of users, having somebody managing that would be absolutely painful, I'd imagine. I've never done it myself, but I'd imagine it would be quite painful. And that portal basically allowed them to, there's a lot of work in the design, in the initial setup and the configuration. EUM, the solution, did a lot of the work, but it automates that process. So users come in, they register to the correct portal, they get recognized and allocated into specific groups, which would then give them access to the relevant training. There was a lot of design work in that one, wasn't there, Peter? But it is successfully running, and it's something that we've replicated now a handful of times at similar size organizations, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And I mean, NHS was one of our first sort of large-scale registration scenarios where we spent a lot of time on that user journey through there. Like, how do we minimize the number of pages they go through and decisions that get made, but also, at the end of the day, you don't want a manual approval of 25,000 people. Like, that's a lot of people to look at and say yes or no, do we approve them or not? And we were able to work with NHS to say, hey, I think there was maybe a dozen or a dozen and a half different email domains that was the vast majority of the people, because they were other healthcare organizations. They weren't part of NHS, but they knew who those orgs were. So when somebody came in from one of those email domains, they're like, okay, we know that they're with this organization and their role is this. They should take this training, and that just all happens automatically. Nobody needs to look at that. So it's that key of how do we simplify and streamline that process so this can happen at scale. Because when you think about, as this was getting rolled out, you've got literally hundreds of people a day registering. You can't have somebody reviewing those. You've got to have some automation around that. Now, there's always exceptions that fall out to say, hey, this person registered with a Gmail. We don't really know where they're coming from. Let's validate and check that out. But if those are the minor exception, then that's much more manageable.
And I think what was interesting about that as well, the concept started as this e-learning, particularly around Microsoft skills and sort of soft skills learning, e-learning content, but it's been rolled out now to like practice specific stuff and career specific stuff as well, that users are now interacting with Learn 365 to complete that training. So it's not just the, your sort of soft e-learning woolly courses that they're completing. It's actually practice specific stuff that is relevant to career development within the NHS, which is quite cool.
Right. Cool. So the next one I wanted to talk about was, actually something that you've seen a little bit of. We've started to surface it up, but it's our partner portal. Like, how do us as external user manager and you as Essential work together and collaborate together? So if I come down here into our, am I in the right one? Yes. It's probably signed me out. Oh no, kept my session going here. So we have a partner demo site here. We're still finishing off the pieces on this. This is all getting built on we just launched version 7. We're getting our partner portal site up to date with that. We're also going through a conversion to HubSpot. Essential uses HubSpot. You were a big part of our decision to say, hey, that's a great CRM. Let's move over there. So we're kind of getting all these pieces going here, but the concept is to be able to come into a partner site. So imagine this is the Essential site. I took the liberty of adding you in, Charles, here as a person in here, and what are key documents that we're working on together? What are key links that we have? And how do we get into a partner dashboard? So our goal is to be able to take the HubSpot deal information that you and Ross and the rest of the Essential team are involved in and expose it right here in the portal. So you can actually see the deals that you've registered that we're working on together, update the progress on them, dates, dollars, things like that, and have that push live right back into our HubSpot. But doing that in a secure way. Not that we don't trust you guys, but you probably shouldn't go in and be able to update some other partners' deals, nor would you want them seeing yours. So making sure that we've got that security in place from that point of view. And providing general sales and marketing resources. So there's standard EUM decks and things like that we want you to have access to. This will be your place to come get that. And then from a support point of view, right now we're using Zendesk. We're actually just moving that over to HubSpot as well. So you can open tickets, you can see the status on it, do that kind of stuff. All in one place, but all secured through Enter ID and Microsoft 365. In fact, these documents themselves live in the team site, which is the Essential EUM team site where we do all of our collaboration. And then seeing who the folks are on both sides. So I can click into you and say, hey, here's a little background on Charles, here's his LinkedIn, his company website, and be able to navigate through that as well. So that's something we're very proud of. We're pushing forward to move that forward. We're actually doing the same thing on the client side to say, hey, Envision IT is our consulting side of the business. We want to do the same thing with our consulting clients and let them come into a portal and experience that. So you can see, it's a different URL. It's got a different branding on it. It's actually the same portal. It's just two different brands getting exposed up. And the key part of these custom portals is seeing your company domain as the address for the portal. So it's your brand, having your look and feel on it. We could build an Essential one like this. We're going to be getting the demo one going for yours and your tenant shortly and go from there. So when I sign in here, again, whatever groups that I belong to, I've got a bunch of different groups. I can see the partner demo V7. I could actually view it in the Envision IT context. It's the same thing, or I can come into a client site, for example, here. Same sort of idea as the partner site. You know, we've still got feature documents and links and such. We've got folks from both organizations in here, but then highlighting projects out to say, hey, I want to go into Contosa Project 1 here and see details about the project. Who's the PM on our side? What's the project charter? You know, what are the dates around the project? What are all the documents? But I mean, this is building on the data room stuff that you and I talked about, Charles, back in March, which is how do we expose this SharePoint and Teams hosted content in this custom portal. But if somebody was to click through that and link into that document, you know, I'm into Word in SharePoint, but I don't really know that as a user. I just went to the client portal and went into this document. I can co-author with people if I have the rights and do all those cool things from a Microsoft 365 point of view. But we kind of hid the complexity of Microsoft and made it simple. That's our goal from that perspective. So those are some of our scenarios, and a couple of others that we can touch on here. If we think about, for example, committees is one that both orgs work a lot with, and we built a whole committee package on top of data room that we've got the committee members, we've got committee documents, and we can see upcoming and past meetings. I don't have any set up in this one here right now, but it gives you a sense of how that hangs together. So those are just some different examples from that perspective. We've got some screenshots of those in the deck if folks are coming back to those later. But I know we're almost at the 45-minute mark, which is our stop on here. So, you know, just thinking about on the essential side, Charles, if you want to take a minute and talk about some of the services that you guys do.
Yeah, I touched on a few of them earlier, but obviously my camera's gone. Have I gone pink again on your side, Peter?
You have. I thought it was some weird effect you had going or something.
I don't know why that keeps happening. I'm not putting a filter on, I promise. That's bizarre, and it's an integrated
you're back.
webcam as well, so that's not great. But yeah, as I sort of alluded to earlier, we sort of specialised and focused our attention, our focus on plugging the gaps that Microsoft doesn't fill. Our main goal with any project that we do is to create a strong customer relationship as well as a partner relationship. We really want to go on that journey with you, and we've got numerous customers that have, you know, started with an old email archive migration, way back when, and are now we're now doing some SharePoint archiving projects and some external access requirements as well. So we really want to go on that journey with customers, and the more complex the better. It's weird, we've sort of created a niche in taking on those complex projects, and really running with them and expanding that as we go through the journey. Like I said, we're a small organization, but people stick around. You know, we've got the turnover of staff is super low. I'm in my 10th year now. This was my first company out of university, but 10 years is nothing in comparison to some of the guys that are still here. I know Sarah, who we've already mentioned, has been around literally from the start. So whether it's work-based booking, learning management systems in M365, or intranets, extranets, SharePoint consultancy, we really like to go on that journey with customers, much the same as you do.
Cool, thank you. Just a quick announcement. So we've got up on our events here, we've got an AI search and OpenAI talk that I'm giving in September. We're kind of taking August off because it's holiday time for folks. And part of that is actually going to be showing off some of the new things. We haven't launched our EUM website on our new version 7, but a big part of version 7 is the Azure AI search and the ability to light up search in here. So, I mean, we've been busy from a content authoring point of view. We've got tons of articles and content that you can browse through right now, but shortly in the next week or two, we're going to launch this version out. So, you know, if you're curious about things like shared channels that I was talking about, being able to do a search of that and pull up all the articles, it's doing full text search of that. So it's going to be very cool from that point of view. So tune into that. September 10th, we've got that from that point of view. And then just key takeaways from the session, like, yes, you could turn off external sharing in your Microsoft 365. Don't kid yourself, sharing still happens, so you might as well embrace it and put some governance in around it, because 365 is a much more secure way of doing that than either email or shadow IT. There's lots of levers, there's lots of ways to configure it. Getting the right controls in place is a balance, and it's something that both the folks at Essential and ourselves happy to work with you and help out from that point of view. So we're at the 45 there. I want to thank you, Charles, for joining in on the webinar. It's always fun to do these tag team together. And for everybody who's joined us, thanks for tuning in, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody. If anyone wants to hang around and ping a few questions, do feel free. We'll hold on for 30 seconds. I'm sure there'll be someone burning in there. Or you've answered all the questions, Peter, which would be great. One thing for anybody that is, we've got a question from Sophia. Please feel free to go ahead, Sophia.
Hi, so I do have a question about some of the portals you created. From the end user perspective, it does seem very simple and easy. From the site owner perspective or the administrative perspective of actually managing that content and the user experience, how challenging is that, or is that just as easy as the front facing?
We've done a lot of work on that side as well. So I didn't get a chance to show this side of the product, but this is sort of the administrative side, but it's intended to be delegated to the business. So I'm signed in as an admin right now, but let's say I was just a manager of one group. All I would see is users groups in here, and when I went into groups, I would only see my group. So if I went in, say, to that partner site that I was using as an example, if I need to add or remove people through here, it's super easy to do that. I can export all the people that are in my group over to an Excel. I could define who are the delegated membership managers that just get to manage the people versus who are the group owners that can actually change the way the group works, and things you can do there to say, hey, I don't want to just have this as an invitation. I want to make it a private registration group, but I do want to put approvals on, but I want to do some auto approvals based on email domains. So there's lots of controls you can put in there as to how you set this up and how you work with it. Where the AI search has become really valuable is things like, hey, I want all the people that come from the envisionit.com domain. It's very quick to do searches against any of the content in there, manage the people, and work with it from there. There's a whole import export. So there's a lot of functionality to make it easy to manage the people, the groups, and who has access to what from that perspective.
Thank you for that. And for the content that's on the page or the portal, is that like a developer that you need to manage each of the sites?
It's not. So if I go into, say, a news article on the site, so there's a rich content management system behind this as well. So if I'm a portal content author, which is another role we can assign, I can actually edit that page. And I don't need to understand HTML to come in here to say, hey, I just want to update the text. I want to insert in some new images, either that I have already, or I want to upload something new through there. Again, it's very simple and easy to do that. All the tagging around, what type of document is this? Is it news? Is it an article? Where is it? That's all available to me as a content author as well. So yeah, we've kind of looked at all the different roles and said, hey, as an administrator, as a group manager, as a content author, as a portal visitor, how do we optimize all of those journeys and make it simple for all of those people?
Very cool. This is helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for your question.
Any other questions from the chat? There was one other thing I wanted to highlight, Peter. I'm not sure if the slide's available in your deck. I can share my screen actually if that's easier. We're basically running a bit of a scheme with regards to if you guys are now worried after listening to Peter about and hearing my anecdote about external sharing and worried who's got access to what and historical stuff. We actually have a solution. That's the slide I was looking for. That will basically, it's a 30-day free trial. There's no obligation. Obviously, it will take someone from IT to be involved in this, but you can basically run an insights report, which will give you all that information. So what's shared externally, what external users have access to what, and it basically gives you a breakdown, nice reporting dashboard and information in and around all of the externally shared stuff. this can then, allow you to take remediation work on that and be able to lock it down again and leave you in a safer place than the organization that I mentioned earlier that have an open Dropbox somewhere with loads of confidential stuff sitting in the ether. So if that is useful, I mean, I'm sure this will be covered in the email follow-up, and we'll take you to a link in order to access that. But do feel free to reach out if that is something that is of interest to you.
Cool. Thanks, Charles.
No problem.
So I think we're a wrap there.
Yeah, I think so.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Cool. Yeah, thanks everybody for your time. I really appreciate your time as well, Peter. That was really interesting.
Likewise. Bye now.